Tonight on Paranormal.
ELF is .08.
That's definitely a copperhead.
I just got a shot with her looking right at me. Hello? Is someone up here? Backing up. If there is somebody in this house, can you make a noise really loud for us? Miranda? In spring of 2016, Crypto began working on a new investigation, the case of Corbin Cabin in Shenandoah National Park. Corbin Cabin's a former mountaineers cabin built by George T. Corbin in the early 1900s. I first became aware of Corbin Cabin in 2010 or 11, I think, and I'd heard about it through the research of a group called the Adventure Myths Investigation Team. The Adventure Myths group had visited the cabin and shot a short documentary film there called The Legends of Corbin Cabin.
The legend of Corbin Cabin is that Nee Corbin, the wife of the owner of the house, who died during childbirth on the floor, still walks the grounds.
During the Adventure Myths investigation, they heard some noises they couldn't quite explain, and at one point, a frying pan hanging on a hook in the kitchen area actually fell off the wall. I reached out to the Adventure Myths team director, Frank Polavecca, and he was good enough to give me some more information about their investigations and some of the behind the scenes of the shooting of their documentary. And I was blown away at just how cool it looked, and regardless of whether or not there are ghosts there or not, I just couldn't wait to get down to Shenandoah and check it out for myself.
One of the initial preparations that we had to do for Corbin Cabin is you always want to do a little bit of a history background check, how the location started, and any snippets of information that can either verify or disprove any type of recordings that are at the location. For Corbin Cabin, as far as the research that was conducted, there was a recording that was found of George Corbin actually in an interview, which we then used later on.
Each year, Shenandoah National Park in Northern Virginia attracts over 1 million visitors who, flocking to view the natural splendor and awe-inspiring views along the famous Skyline Drive, tread lands with countless stories to tell. The 311-mile area that was authorized for the new park in 1926 was already home to a culture of mountain dwellers, or hollow folk, whole, largely self-sufficient communities, mainly of Christian faith, who lived in the isolated hollows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. When the government came in 1938, the farmers and families that were paid were offered sums of up to $700 for their lands and told to vacate. All of the mountain communities, which had existed peacefully for generations, were dispersed, and the farms, homes, and even churches dismantled or burned in their wake, and the forests left to reclaim what had once been open farmland. Few original constructions survived the building of the new park, but among them was Corbin Cabin. Erected in 1909 by George T. Corbin on lands purchased from his father, Corbin Cabin survives today as one of the only remaining structures from a time when people lived in what is now a national park. Born August 2nd, 1888, George Corbin, a farmer and moonshine brewer, built the cabin that now bears his name as a home for himself and his second wife, Nee. Corbin was already a widow at 21. All four of the Corbin children were born in the cabin, but in winter of 1924, just 3 hours after giving birth to Corbin's third son, Nee Corbin died of complications. George remarried in the following years, his third wife, Eula, caring for the children and remaining in the cabin until they too, like all the families that dwelled in the hollows, were forced to abandon their home and adapt to the world at large. In 1938, the federal government had promised compensation to George Corbin in the sum of $500 for his cabin and 5 acres of land. Although, as he later recounted, I didn't get a nickel of that. The suggestion of a ghostly presence residing in the cabin would seem to stem from the circumstance of Nee Corbin's untimely death. However, since opening to the public, reports began of visitors encountering unsettling disturbances, shuffling and scratching sounds coming from the cabin's loft, and the fleeting figure of a young woman has been seen walking amongst the trees around the cabin. Animals seem disquieted too. Pets brought to Corbin Cabin are said to become agitated and scared, pacing relentlessly for hours. Added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1989, Shenandoah National Park and the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, keepers of the hiking path that bear its name and the current owners, continue to maintain the Mountaineers' cabin and rent it to hikers and park visitors. Investigations like Corbin Cabin or any outdoor location present their own unique set of problems. You're going to a place that doesn't have electricity. You have to hike in. You have to pack differently.
We had the certain equipment that we wanted to use, cameras, audios, motion sensors, and those types of things. But then we also have to pack, camping gear, food, the water purification tablets. You gotta pack everything in your pack, your survival gear, your equipment, and then trek in. So it's definitely a different element, especially if you're hiking down or hiking up to a location.
The drive to Virginia was very long, but Haley and I were quite comfortable sleeping in the back seat and eating leftover pizza.
Haley is my dog. She's about 8 years old. She's a pit bull terrier mix, but she is currently a service dog for me, and we decided to take her on this investigation. It was reported that dogs maybe feel some type of energy in the cabin. We did find some reportings of someone coming with their dog and the dog being agitated the whole time, pacing back and forth in the cabin. So we wanted to sort of bring Haley along to see if we could debunk any of that. For Corbin Cabin, we had a drive of about 7 to 8 hours to make it down to Virginia.
Once we got to the main gates of Shenandoah National Park, we headed along Skyline Drive. From the parking area, we shouldered our packs and then began the 1.5 mile descent down into Nicholson Hollow and to Corbin Cabin.
This hike is brutal. Oh my God.
First impression of Corbin Cabin was, wow, how cool is this? But the trip could have started totally differently.
Nick wound up actually almost treading on a snake, and not just a snake, but like a copperhead. Copperhead snakes are very poisonous.
And it had just been chilling right there on a rock. Luckily, I didn't get bitten and have to be airlifted out of a national park.
So that was a little bit of a fun misstep.
5:32, okay. Ready, Haley? Oh, that's freaking creepy. And that's George Corbin.
Be aware, copperheads around kitchen chimney. Please be careful around structure.
The inside of Corbin Cabin is pretty dark, even during the day, and it's got this great sort of rich smell of firewood. Just have a peek out here.
Haley.
Should we have a peek upstairs?
Yeah.
When we took Haley inside the cabin, she didn't really act any differently. Her temperament was the same. She didn't seem agitated.
My first impression of Corbin Cabin was that it's a really cool location to be doing an investigation. It's very much in the middle of nowhere, but truthfully, it's a very peaceful location, I thought. It's very quiet, very calm, but I could see how people would think that maybe it's a little bit creepy.
For equipment setup, we had cameras stationed in every room. It wasn't a very big location.
As well as cameras outside to cover the grounds.
And we also had motion detectors as well. And in the kitchen, we also put up a laser grid.
A laser grid is a unit that projects laser patterns to detect the movement of solid objects.
There were reports of a pan falling off the wall, so we wanted to sort of have the laser grid in there to see if we could pick up on anything in there.
After dinner on the first night, we took our first set of baseline readings, then switched on our cameras and conducted our first EVP session of the night.
EVP stands for Electronic Voice Phenomenon. It is the theory that recorders could pick up noises, voices, and other such things that the human ears can't. EVP is a pseudoscientific practice, but we use it on investigations because there seems to be a heavy correlation between EVP and supposedly haunted locations.
So the first night of investigation, Nick, Pam, and I decided to sit in the living room.
Good evening. If there's anybody here with us tonight, my name is Nick. These are my friends, Miranda and Pam.
I'm Miranda.
I'm Pam.
If there is anybody here with us who would like to come and join us in the living room, feel free to help yourself to a cigarette we left for you and to a glass of whiskey. They're here for you. Is there anybody here in this cabin with us? Are you a member of the Nicholson family by any chance? Are you a Corbin?
That picture on the wall, is that a picture of your husband, George Corbin?
If there is anybody here with us, other than my two friends and our dog here in this room, would you be able to make a really loud noise for us? Could you maybe bang on a wall, please, or move something? Just something to let us know that you're here? How did you feel when the people came here to build the national park and made you leave? I mean, they made you leave your home. I myself would have been pretty upset about that.
Yeah, I heard that.
Critter.
Critter?
I think so. I think it sounds like a mouse.
It is a mouse, I see it.
You do?
He's right down there. He's on the floor.
On our side of the grate?
Yeah. Okay, so we have a mouse. We just continued to sit in the room, conducting EVP, listening, observing. The place seemed pretty quiet. If you are here and you're trying to talk to us, thank you very much, but we just can't hear you and we can't see you. We do have some devices set up here on the ground. If you would maybe walk towards one of these devices or move your hand in front of them, they're not going to hurt you or anything like that. They're just going to tell us that you're here. Would you be able to approach these devices we have set up on the floor? You hear tapping?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it sound like it's coming to?
The kitchen. Really?
I thought it
sounded like it was outside the screen.
I thought it sounded like it was over there. Is there anybody here with us right now?
We started hearing a tapping sound. And the interesting thing about this is that each one of us felt like the sound was coming from a different room.
Is that you making the tapping sounds? If you can, or if you are, that's great. That's what we want, but can you give us something a little bit louder or more extreme? Or can you tap 3 times in a row for yes? Nothing else seemed to be happening, so we decided to take another set of baseline readings and then head out to the grounds where the apparition of Nee Corbin has allegedly been seen.
When we went outside, Nick had the FLIR with him. FLIR stands for Forward-Looking Infrared Radar. And what the FLIR essentially detects is heat signatures.
Corbin, are you out here?
Everything seemed pretty quiet, and then we got a hit on the thermal.
That's moving.
The anomaly was definitely an animal. It was maybe 100, 150 feet away in the woods.
That's totally moving.
I decided to get a little bit closer to see if I could get a better shot of it and determine what kind of animal it was.
It's really low to the ground. Big?
As I got closer, it moved and moved really quickly out of frame. And, well, we decided to save our asses and retreat back into the cabin.
After we came back inside, we did another set of baselines, and then hung around and decompressed a little bit before going to bed.
We decided to sleep in the loft area. Haley stayed with us, and we left our cameras and motion sensors recording throughout the night.
It was nice, but it was very, very hot. And there were also snakes coming out of the walls, so a little bit unsettling. But other than that, it was decent.
And when my head hit the pillow that night, I have to say, I just went out like a light.
I think we were so tired that it didn't really matter where we slept.
On the first night, at around 3 o'clock, 3:15 in the morning, Pam and I were woken up by the repeated sound of one of our motion sensors going off in the kitchen. I decided to go downstairs to investigate and discovered it was just a mouse walking across the table. Corbin Cabin has no electricity, no power, no running water, nothing like that. If you're going to the bathroom, you're either going in a privy outside or just in the woods. We had to bring our own water from the nearby Hughes River, which of course then has to be purified or boiled before you can use it. We ate rice, noodles, various camping foods, World War I rations, just kidding.
On day 2 of Corbin Cabin, we woke up and did a set of baselines and decided that we were going to go and try to see if we could explore and find where the cemetery was that was allegedly or is allegedly close to the cabin.
That's definitely a copperhead.
Yeah, this is a Nicholson cabin. Rolling, and you're out of shot. Now I can still kind of see him.
Look at him. I just got a shot with her looking right at me. Wow. Wow. I've never seen cubs before.
Unfortunately, when we went out on our little expedition, we didn't find the cemetery. However, we did find a mama bear and her 2 cubs, which were relatively close to where we were, but we got some good bear footage.
So in Corbin Cabin, there are books and other historical materials pertaining to the history of the cabin and the national park itself. There's a copy of the book Skyland by George Freeman Pollock. And Pam and Miranda spent a long time going through these materials and recording them for our own research.
So Virgil Corbin was not Nee Corbin's son.
So night 2, we still had the same camera set up and the same equipment set up and all of that, but instead of doing an EVP session together in the living room, we all split up. Nick went to the kitchen, Pam stayed in the living room, and I went up into the loft area.
All right. We decided to begin that night with a pretty typical EVP session.
Rolling dining room, EVP session, 10:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, June 20th, 2016, Corbin Cabin. Good evening, is there anybody here? I know I told you we'd be trying to talk to you again tonight. Nee Corbin, are you here?
Hello, my name's Miranda from yesterday. Is there anybody in here with me right now? Or in the cabin?
Were you the one that moved the cooking pot in this room? And if it was you, would you be able to do it again? Can you move any of the pots here?
.5 degrees Fahrenheit. DC is at 0.2. And tri-field is at 0.
Nothing seemed to be happening, so we decided to conduct an auditory response experiment.
An auditory response experiment is typically when you have some type of audio recording, and if it has some type of significance to a particular entity or a particular location, if you, in theory, play this audio recording, it might stir up some activity.
In this case, we used recordings of George Corbin's voice, as well as the sound of a baby crying.
Beginning auditory response experiment.
I was born August the 2nd, 1888. And just today, when I built the cabin.
I think that was around 1909 or 10, according to
Well, that's right, Mr. Peterson. We checked back where he's got it. I was going to build
I
it.
definitely hear a mouse in
you
here.
were around 21 or 22 then, I believe. You married then, George? When you built the cabin?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. This was your first wife?
Second wife.
Your second wife.
Husband had died.
Do you know who that was who was talking in that recording? That was the voice of George Corbin, husband of Nee Corbin. Nee, if you're here, do you recognize that voice? Do you recognize your husband's voice? Can you hear the baby crying? There's a baby crying and I think it needs help. Is there anybody here who can help the baby?
Do you remember hearing your baby cry?
Did you get to name your baby?
Who else was with you when you were having your baby? Was it just you and your husband?
Personally, I really don't think that there's anyone in this house but my friends Pam and Miranda. I think we're alone here. If there is somebody here and you'd like to talk to us, you need to try harder.
Or you can touch one of us. Or pet the dog. She's very friendly.
Miranda?
Something fell, but there was a gust of wind just now.
It was the screen with a gust of wind, but it scared the shit out of me.
The sound turned out being just a screen falling out of the window because of a gust of wind.
I mean, everybody jumped. Pam jumped, I jumped, Haley jumped. Miranda's camera shook like crazy.
Yeah, it scared the shit.
That sound was so fucking loud in the quiet.
I don't really know how exactly this goes back in here. After we put the screen back, we conducted Evp session for a little bit longer.
After wrapping up EVP, we sat down and did some baselines, and I just went around to check the cameras to make sure that everything was in focus, the tapes were good, because we were going to leave the cameras rolling. When I went into the loft, I noticed that the camera was completely zoomed into the wall. You know the screen up here on the high 8?
Yeah?
You can't see shit.
What do you mean?
On the hike out, we wound up actually getting a lot of rain and a thunderstorm started to roll in, so we needed to pick up the pace a little bit. At least I got drenched.
So you just did the hike, Miranda. How do you feel?
Like, fuck off.
The evidence review process consists of looking over all of our video, listening to all the audio, going over our base readings, and trying to compare what we find to the reports.
It took a little over a week for the review of the investigation.
I'm eating with a mic on. That's probably not a good idea.
Crypto was able to provide some natural explanations for claims of activity at Corbin. The biggest one would be animals. There was a lot of mice. We had a snake come in through the fireplace at about 1 o'clock in the morning, so that could definitely explain a lot of the noises that people were hearing. We also found that it's a drafty building. We had the screen fall out of the window, and that could explain, other items falling off of the walls.
As far as the reports that were made about dogs having some type of unsettled energy in Corbin Cabin, I think we can say, at least for Haley, it was debunked because she was not perturbed at all.
All the environmental conditions that we looked at Corbin Cabin remained within normal parameters. We measured everything from temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure to electromagnetic fields, radio, and microwave levels.
Upon evidence review, we wound up finding, that the sounds, the knocking sounds that we had heard the first night were actually caught on the audio recording.
And it definitely, in my opinion, could have been caused by the rodents in Corbin.
When I reviewed the camera feed from the static camera we had in the loft area on the second night of the investigation, I was shocked by what I saw. 6 minutes into the tape, about 30 seconds or so after we started EVP Session, Miranda's in frame and the camera starts zooming in by itself.
Good evening. Is there anybody here? Miss Haley. I know I told you we'd be trying to talk to you again tonight. How many people are in this cabin? Do you have a favorite room? Nee Corbin, are you here? At one point, you went upstairs, this is night 2, and you discovered that the camera that was set up in the loft area was totally zoomed in.
Yeah.
What do you remember from that?
I remember before we started EVP Session, I walked up the stairs. I'm pretty sure that I checked to just make sure where it was zoomed in, so then I'd know where to sit. I mean, not zoomed in, but that the frame was good enough to be able to see me and all that stuff. And then after the screen fell, we concluded EVP very shortly after, and that's when I noticed that it was zoomed in. So one of the possibilities that we thought initially could have been that when the screen fell out, it might have hit the camera and zoomed in.
I'd like to show you the camera feed from that incident. So what we're looking at here is the night vision camera feed from second floor.
So I'm already downstairs at this point. Pam is directly below you. How many people are in this cabin? Do you have a favorite room?
That's the rest of like the 40 minutes.
So yeah, that's the thoughts, opinions.
Like that's weird because if it was something like say it got jammed or stuck because it's an old camera, I feel like it would either happen like really fast or it would be consistent. There wouldn't be a stop in the middle.
What did you feel like while you were upstairs?
There didn't really feel like presence per se, but going into like an old creepy attic, you can kind of psych yourself out. So it was definitely eerie. I know you said you looked into like if the camera were to malfunction and do it itself, that if and when that could possibly happen, like what kind of speed
Exactly,
it happens at.
Closest thing I could see is faulty toggle switch. And I mean, as a professional film editor and camera operator, I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not an experience I've had.
When I saw the zoomed in camera on night 2, you know, we went back and thought about it during evidence review, and when we looked at it, it did zoom in by itself about 6 minutes in. Now, what's interesting about this is that it didn't zoom in until we had officially started the EVP session.
We've all looked at this clip numerous times. We've got some ideas as to why this might be happening, but nothing's conclusive at this point. I can't say it's a ghost manipulating that camera. You don't see one, you don't hear one. And at the time, nothing anomalous was recorded on any other cameras or audio recorders in the location.
Is Corbin Cabin haunted? I don't think we can definitively say that it is.
I can say that cameras don't usually zoom in by themselves.
It's definitely a location that we would like to go and revisit and gather some further data and see if we can get a little bit more of a response when we're there.
It's an amazing location. The wildlife alone makes me want to go back, and we are definitely going to return to Corbin Cabin someday soon and continue our research.